Amazing love story revealed, homeless man's hidden CEO life transforms billionaire woman's heart. Jonah's breath caught in his throat as he leaned against the cold concrete of a San Francisco alley, watching the affluent crowd bustle past. Bright suits, designer bags, everyone engaged in their high-stakes lives while he remained invisible, a ghost adrift in a sea of vitality and ambition. The quick rise and fall of his own career echoed in his mind like a broken vinyl record, replaying moments of glory now steeped in shadows. Once a respected CEO, he had poured himself into his work. Now, he couldn't even secure a single meal each day. He squeezed the crumpled paper in his hand, an old business card bearing a vision he no longer recognized. Every day felt like a test of his integrity and willpower. He had witnessed ambition transform leaders into tyrants, and still, he clung to the belief that hard work and integrity defined a man's worth. Yet, every step brought with it haunting questions. Was that all a facade now? Was the effort worth the humiliation of living on the streets? What happens when a man you once knew as yourself disappears? These doubts filled his thoughts like smoke, suffocating each memory of who he had been, and plunging him deeper into despair. The corner cafe he frequented became a reminder of the contrast between his former life and his current struggle. As Jonah shuffled on crinkled shoes in and out of the streams of privileged consumers, he spotted Madison across the room. The billionaire, a whirlwind of energy and intelligence, stirred something long dormant within him, yet he felt unworthy of her gaze. Her brisk strides and authoritative commands to her assistant pierced through the atmosphere with a sharpness that made Jonah's heart race nervously. But what could he possibly have to offer someone like her? Nothing more than stories tainted by his failures, a life marred by circumstances he couldn't control. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Yet, the world began to shift when Madison, intrigued by the contrast before her, initiated brief conversations. Each exchange revealed his sharp mind, his perceptions of success, deeply human insights about value. As they spoke beneath the stars, Jonah wrestled with the gnawing fear of being seen as a charity case rather than a person. The last thing he wanted was to become a token of empathy in a high-flying life. An invisible weight began to stretch between them, a connection forming amid the raw vulnerability of their realities. Then, like thunder in a clear sky, whispers of his past began to creep into Madison's elite circles. Their friendship shattered like glass as judgmental gazes persisted. Could she align herself with the prejudices of her colleagues, or would she break free from luxury's toxic grip? Jonah felt the tension radiating from every cell in his body, anxious and overwhelmed with the friction of loyalty weighing against societal norms. This was no longer a heartwarming bond, it was a crucible. As their delicate connection dangled in the balance, Jonah uncovered the wealth of knowledge he had once thought long lost. Not just business strategies, but pieces of himself he feared would never surface again. The stakes rose higher. Would she stand firm, unyielding against waves of judgment? Would she transcend her world to grasp the truth they had unearthed? There was no certainty now, only an urgency to decide before it all slipped away. Tension gripped Jonah's heart, leaving him gasping for an answer that seemed impossibly close yet frustratingly out of reach, with everything hanging in the balance. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows as Jonah navigated the bustling downtown streets, each step echoing the turmoil within him. The crunch of crumpled leaves beneath his feet felt like the fleeting whispers of memories. Once again, he confronted the juxtaposition of his present with the man he once was. He had been the architect of multi-million-dollar deals, sparkling dinners with world leaders, and media flashes. Now, he was just another figure merging into the grey public square. Each interaction he had experienced with Madison lingered in his mind, like the notes of a haunting melody. Their conversations, once vibrant, now left him with a chill of uncertainty. The more he shared, the more he questioned whether the wisdom he offered she truly valued, or if it merely washed over her, a trivial curiosity that would fade to the background as a life pulsed with wealth and privilege. The truth was, her deep gaze ignited embers within him he believed had long extinguished. What if she saw more than the man who faltered? Determined to reshape his narrative, Jonah spent the early mornings dissecting his past decisions and the philosophies of leadership that he had once held dear. He studied the Silicon Valley giants whose names frequented medicine-esque conversations, dissecting their journeys and unraveling their motivations in the hopes of resurrecting that part of himself, the visionary amidst the tempest of doubt. He discovered an instinct he had overlooked: adaptability. It struck him like a lightning bolt. He had been reactive, letting life's blows define him, rather than strategizing a comeback. With renewed vigor, he sat down one evening in his makeshift shelter, notepad and pen in hand, detailing a plan. This wasn't merely about financial revival, it was a recalibration of identity. Who was Jonah when stripped of the titles and the status? Each line he scrawled became more deliberate, a manifesto for his rebirth. He felt his pulse quicken as he thus began the daunting task of reaching out to old colleagues, crafting letters that delicately wove his current reality with the expertise that remained dormant. As days turned into weeks, Jonah's morning routine shifted. His hesitations morphed into purpose as he approached the cafe again, though now, he was not merely a passive observer of the world that once embraced him. Each time he entered, he scanned the room and caught medicine's eye. Today, the familiar warmth of connection met an edge of determination. There were people around, acquaintances who whispered and compared. Yet, for the brief moments they conversed, he realized he was no longer just a listener, the spark of confidence rekindling within him reshaping the dialogue. But the lurking specter of judgment remained potent. One night, after a long day, Jonah stumbled upon a public discussion held in one of the city's upscale venues, an event showcasing innovative entrepreneurs. The invitation, a slip of paper handed to him by a passerby, fluttered enticingly in his pocket. In that instant, doubt clashed with a newfound sense of agency. Here he was, a man with stories to share that could rival those in boardrooms. Was it absurd to consider stepping into that world again? The question aggravated his insides. Would he choke on past failures, or could he articulate something profound enough to breach the barriers he faced? He wanted to extend his hand back into the arena of business, shattering the mold of being just an onlooker. Tomorrow, Jonah whispered to himself as he gripped the invitation tighter, his heart pounding. Tomorrow, I'll decide. But as the clock ticked down, the shadows of his past loomed closer, each whisper carrying the weight of unsaid fears and potential rejection. Would reaching for the limelight mean a second chance or another devastating fall? The moment of action was upon him, pushing him to confront every fissure of fear that had ever held him captive. Jonah woke with a jolt, the sleep still clinging to him like fog. The sun streamed through the slits of his makeshift shelter, illuminating the crumpled paper scattered around him, pieces of his manifesto, sketches of plans that brimmed with ambitious possibilities. Yesterday's resolve surged back into focus as he clasped the invitation in his hand, its edges crinkled but its promise bold. The cafe buzzed with life as Jonah entered, baristas expertly crafting lattes, patrons engaged in animated discussions, and the aroma of freshly baked pastries wafting through the air. Today, he wasn't just a passerby, he was a player on a stage he once thrived in. As he wove through the tables, the warmth of the morning sun invigorated him, filling him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. With every step toward medicine's table, his heart raced. Their recent conversations enveloped him like a rich tapestry of shared ideas and tentative confessions. Yet, the weight of the unspoken loomed larger. Did she perceive his humility as weakness, or did she recognize the potential for renewal? He inhaled deeply, channeling every ounce of courage as he greeted her, the brightness in her eyes rekindling his spark. Jonah. You're back, she smiled, a hint of surprise in her tone, which struck him as promising. Yeah, I thought I might join you for a minute, he replied, taking a seat across from her. The friendly buzz of the cafe faded into a mere hum, and their connection sharpened into focus. They exchanged mundane updates at first, but undercurrents of deeper conversation stirred as Jonah recalled tidbits from their last talk, weaving them into a narrative that portrayed growth and clarity. He found himself leaning in, drawing her into his vision of the future, a life lived with intention and vigor. He spoke fluidly, concepts he had studied and strategies he wished to implement spilling forth like a rich river. The all-consuming need for validation began to dissolve. The words he crafted weren't for her approval, they were a testament to his commitment to reclaiming his identity. Yet, as Jonah moved deeper into his vision, a familiar specter whispered doubt into his ear: could he deliver on the grand promises he was making? Self-scrutiny crept back in. A part of him still recoiled at the risks. Stepping on a stage meant the potential for another catastrophic fall. Your ideas are invigorating, Madison remarked, a slight frown knitting her brow. What is holding you back from sharing them with a larger audience? Her question pierced through him. He hesitated, grappling with vulnerability, and unearthed a truth he had spent too long buried. fear of judgment was paralyzing. I guess, it's just that I've lost my footing before, Jonah admitted, each word a small slice of surrender. I used to think my successes define me, but now, he chuckled softly, now it feels like I'm just getting started fresh. But fresh is frightening. The honesty hung between them, raw and tender, and unshielded peek into his soul. He expected pity, perhaps the flicker of disdain, but what he found reflected in Madison's eyes was genuine empathy. Fresh is also exciting, Jonah, she encouraged, her voice steadying him. You have insights that could ignite ideas. Don't let that fear steal this moment from you. His brain raced, plots and possibilities intertwining. Her words began to unravel the threads binding his doubts, igniting an ember of possibility to confront the stage he longed to return to. But as excitement tugged at him, another thought weighed heavier than the rest: how would he navigate a return to an environment that had once chewed him up and spit him out? Jonah stood abruptly, his chest scraping against the floor. Okay. I need to make a decision. The invitation crumpled in his pocket felt like a ticking clock, now a countdown to something momentous. Are you thinking of going? Madison's voice brought him back from the precipice of contemplation. Yes, he whispered, hardly believing himself. This wasn't merely an event, it was the battleground of his reality. Jonah would need to face the giants, both literal and metaphorical, the doubt that shadowed him, the career failures that lingered, and the potential for judgment from those who had once embraced him. As he stepped away from the table, adrenaline surged through him. Tonight, I'll be there, he declared, the words escaping in a rush. Jonah. She called, a mix of support and concern threading through her voice. But he didn't look back just yet. Each step taking him further resonated with the echo of newfound determination. This was just the beginning. The world he'd once navigated awaited him once again, though it was transformed, and so was he. What awaited him in the spotlight, however, was yet to be seen, the shadows of his past lingering tantalizingly close as he moved forward. Would he be the architect of his destiny or merely an echo of past failures? The evening beckoned with both promise and peril, the stage setting for a confrontation he could no longer avoid. The moment was near, a test he couldn't ignore. Inside his makeshift shelter, Jonah felt the weight of the sun pressing against his back as he prepared for the imminent gathering. The invitation in his pocket felt heavier than he remembered, as though it held the gravity of his past failures and future aspirations all at once. Each creased line echoed the doubts that had shadowed him for far too long. He stepped out into the crisp evening air, the world igniting with the hum of life. Cars zipped by, and distant laughter punctuated the air. Jonah was acutely aware of every sound, every movement around him. This moment felt pivotal. He was a phoenix, freshly emerged from ash. But just as quickly as he felt renewed, the shadows of uncertainty clawed back at the edges of his consciousness. The cafe he frequented was now a distant memory. Tonight, the shadows would stretch across a different arena where he would have to face not only the audience's gaze but also his own reflection. As the crowd gathered, people intermingled, their conversations a cacophony of ambition and dreams. Jonah's heart raced, his mind flooded with visions of failure, snickering laughter, promptly dismissed ideas, the sting of old disappointments. But buried beneath that anxiety was a burgeoning determination, a new resolve sparked by Madison's support. He was here not to seek validation but to reclaim his voice, to shake off the fright of the past like a bad jacket. Each step toward the venue felt like a prelude to battle, the concrete underfoot transforming into a stage for his resurrection. Inside, the pulsating energy was intoxicating, wrapping around him like an embrace. Jonah glanced at the assembled crowd, professionals, creative minds, and idealists buzzing with the same ambition that once coursed through his veins. The sight took him aback. Now he was among them, and with each breath, he internalized the mantra: this was no longer just about him. It was about his ideas, visions, and healing. With an eye on the podium looming in the room's center, Jonah sat at the table, his thoughts spiraled like autumn leaves in a brisk wind. He described to himself what it would feel like to share his ideas, what it would mean to take that leap. Each word he considered was a thread weaving him closer to his authentic self, yet lingering questions wove a tapestry of doubt. Would his voice resonate? Would the audience care? As he stared at the crowd, Jonah sensed the flicker of his own potential, simmering beneath the surface. Hidden talents glowed for their moment, perhaps buried under fear for too long. But at that moment, he felt a burgeoning belief coming alive. Allowing himself to envision success for that, he needed to dig deeper than ever before. An announcer took the stage, commanding attention with an infectious enthusiasm. Jonah could feel the pulse of the energy shift toward anticipation. The weight of expectation filled the room. As names were called and others crushed their nerves to deliver ideas, he felt the call and response of inner conflict. He would need to confront those thoughts: fear of failure, fear of judgment. Would he rise to the occasion or retreat to the obscurity he had clawed his way out of? Jonah shifted uneasily in his seat as he waited for his turn. The announcer's voice resonated through his limbs. His name rang out, swift but poignant. Jonah's vision for change has sparked intrigue. Time froze. This was the moment he prepared for but felt woefully unprepared to seize. The light hit him, blinding and exhilarating, as he stood to step toward the podium. His heart galloped wildly against his chest, fear and excitement in a delicate balance. A solitary thought echoed fervently: what if this was his breakthrough? With each step forward, he sought to redirect that fear, transforming it into energy, into action. Empowered by every possibility, Jonah looked out at the crowd, eager yet petrified. As he inhaled deeply, his mind sharpened into focus. He would share his insights and embrace authenticity. But what if his ideas were dismissed? What if silence engulfed him? The stakes felt infinitely high, yet he stood ready on the precipice, poised to redefine his narrative. Taking a deep breath, Jonah began: tonight, I am not just here to share an idea, I am here to share the journey that made me who I am today. This was only the beginning. What revelations awaited him as he formally embraced the stage, and would he finally confront the giants of his past? He leaned into the moment, understanding implicit challenges were about to unfold. The podium loomed closer, becoming an altar where Jonah would either be sacrificed to fear or rise as an advocate for his journey. He gripped the sides, steadying himself against the rush of adrenaline that threatened to overtake him. His thoughts twisted like smoke in the air. What had he really learned? What wisdom could he impart? Each heartbeat seemed to thrum louder, drowning out his self-doubt, but still, a flicker of hesitation lingered in the back of his mind, whispering that he might not be enough. He caught a glimpse of Madison in the crowd, her encouraging smile providing a warm anchor. That glance infused him with renewed purpose. Here, among accomplished individuals, he felt less like an imposter and more like a voice that mattered. Everyone, Jonah started, his voice wavering before gathering strength. I used to think success was defined by what I had: material stability, societal approval. But I learned that real strength comes from adversity. It was during those darkest moments, living on the streets, that I discovered my voice and my vision. With each word, Jonah peeled back layers of his experience, exposing the tender, vulnerable core. He spoke of sleepless nights filled with introspection, of walking for hours to find sunlight when all felt cloaked in darkness. He reflected on moments of despair twisted with glimpses of hope, where each struggle revealed an untapped reservoir of resilience within him. The pain of those memories transformed into a testament of growth and adaptation, shining a light on how he could use those lessons to uplift others. As he spoke, Jonah began to notice subtle shifts in the crowd. The tightness in their shoulders relaxed, intrigued expressions replaced casual disinterest. This was no longer a monologue, it transformed into a dialogue of connectivity, bridging his past with their present. He realized he wasn't simply sharing his story, he was inviting them into his world, allowing vulnerability to weave common threads. His journey wasn't just his alone, it resonated with the universal longing for belonging and understanding. Each revelation softened his earlier fears, fragmenting them into manageable pieces rather than overwhelming monoliths. Jonah felt the energy of his courage surge, demanding he push through. The fear of rejection morphed into exhilaration. This was a turning point, and he could feel the pulse of transformation in the room. Then, mid-sentence, he paused. A thought congealed into clarity, a decision that would redefine not only this moment but his entire trajectory. I want to encourage those of you who are hesitant to share your own stories. There is strength in vulnerability, and your truths can foster change in others. Let us lift each other up instead of clinging to fear that binds us. The audience erupted into applause, but Jonah's focus sharpened beyond that validation. He'd stepped into a role he never envisioned: an advocate, a connector. The unexpected warmth of acceptance rebounded, solidifying that he had truly found his footing. As the applause faded, Jonah concluded, tonight is not just a presentation, it's a call to action. Let us embark on a journey where we silence self-doubt and amplify our collective potential. Emerging from the podium felt like a rebirth. Jonah had cracked open the door to his next chapter. He was ready not only to articulate his ideas but to mold a movement. Yet as he made eye contact with an imposing figure in the rear of the room, a well-known critic whose skepticism was palpable, Jonah felt an odd mix of exhilaration and foreboding. The path ahead veered into treacherous territory. Would this newfound drive withstand the scrutiny of those who would rather stifle transformation? The moment of truth beckoned. The tension hung in the air as he prepared to confront the imminent challenge, standing on the precipice of not only his ideas but the true test of his character. The moment Jonah stepped off the podium, the applause still echoing in his ears, the atmosphere shifted. He could almost taste the buzz of expectation in the room, mingling with the faint scent of polished wood and the hum of whispered conversations. The critic, a figure famous for dismantling careers with a single scathing comment, loomed larger than life behind a phalanx of eager supporters, eyes piercing through the crowd. Jonah's newfound resolve was about to face its most formidable challenge yet. He took a breath, each inhalation whispering reminders of how he transcended the darkness of his past. However, the power dynamic was palpable. As he navigated through the throng, excitement suddenly transformed into a nervous energy swirling in his gut. What would the critics say? What weapon of words would be aimed at his vulnerability? Madison's presence remained a beacon, a steady gaze offering him reassurance. Yet, the impending confrontation gnawed at him a mix of dread and determination. Accusations of being a fraud flashed through his mind with relentless clarity. Was he truly equipped to advocate for change, or was he just another voice in a world full of noise? Jonah, a deep, commanding voice cut through the din, pulling him from his spiral of thoughts. It was the critic, standing formidable and almost regal, an architect of public perceptions. Your story is compelling, but do you understand the nuances of leadership beyond the pain? Real transformation requires more than personal anecdotes. Each syllable felt like an electric jolt, igniting Jonah's fight-or-flight response. It was not merely a question, it was an indictment of his readiness to assume this new identity. Jonah's heart thundered a rapid drum roll that drowned out his reasoning. He could either retreat into silence and let the storm rage or lean into it, using the fear as a catalyst for articulation. I understand that leadership is multifaceted, Jonah replied, his voice steadying into a measured cadence. It's also about empathy and the willingness to listen, to include the stories of those often overlooked. My journey has equipped me with a unique perspective to foster meaningful dialogue. The crowd shifted, curiosity edging into the tension. Jonah could feel their collective breath anticipating whether he would falter or rise. A flicker of hollowness formed in the pit of his stomach, but as he glanced at Madison, something shifted within him. Her unwavering conviction mirrored back the strength he needed to confront not just the critic but his lingering insecurities. Good intentions aside, how do you propose to structure a leadership that envelopes such complexity? The critic leaned forward, face carved into a mask of scrutinizing skepticism. Personal stories are nice, but they don't create sustainable change. And there it was. A challenge not just of ideas but of his worth. Could he deflect the weight of their past shaping his present vision, or would he become ensnared in the web of self-doubt? I want to deny the need for structure, Jonah asserted, emboldened. But I argue that empathy without action holds no foundation. The narratives we share build bridges necessary for change. The past has taught me resilience, and that resilience drives my drive to connect people. I'm not merely here for personal validation, I want to ignite a shared vision. The conversation felt electric, sparking a dialogue that reverberated within him and the crowd. A ripple of understanding began to unfold. This was an opportunity not solely to defend himself but to articulate a burgeoning ethos of authentic leadership, one that flourished in the fertile soil of lived experience. As Jonah concluded, he realized that the confrontation had propelled him forward. He was reshaping his internal landscape as much as that of the audience. If we don't embody the stories we wish to tell, then how can we ever evolve? A wave of applause washed over him again, but amid the cheers lurked a deeper challenge, ending hyperbolic rhetoric and translating passion into actionable paths. Jonah felt something shift in the energies around him. The critic didn't relent but seemed compelled to reconsider, albeit momentarily. Perhaps the seeds of doubt had begun sprouting cracks in the walls of skepticism. Then, just as the momentum swelled towards a crescendo, the critic's lips curled into a sly smile as he leaned back against the podium, his voice chillingly calm. You've got away with words, but I wonder how long it will be before the world tests your convictions. A silence followed, heavy and suffocating, as Jonah realized this moment was only a precursor to the storm ahead. The battle was only just beginning, but would he be prepared for the trials that would ultimately define him? The air hummed with anticipation as Jonah contemplated how he would sustain the very vision he had just begun to articulate. Confrontation loomed, and the stakes escalated. What would he do when the inevitable backlash emerged to challenge the ideals he now firmly stood behind? The thin line between success and failure had just grown perilously narrow. Jonah stepped away from the podium, the applause fading into the background as he shifted his attention to the critic. The man's sly smile lingered in Jonah's mind, taunting him like a specter. What dismissal awaited him in the days to come? He could already feel the unsettling grip of uncertainty tightening around his chest. Madison approached, her expression a blend of pride and concern. You held your own, she encouraged, but her eyes reflected the weight of the critic's insinuation. But this isn't over, is it? Jonah shook his head slowly, absorbing the warmth of her presence. Not by a long shot. He glanced back at the critic, still enshrined in conversation with his followers. There was strategy in that smile, a sense that the next blow would be calculated and personal. Jonah realized that he just entered a new arena, one where the intensity of his resolve would be put to the test repeatedly. People love a comeback story, Madison said, breaking his thoughts, but they also love watching for the fall. Those words hung in the air, an echo of the doubting thoughts that plagued Jonah since he started harnessing his past to advocate for leadership. As he turned to walk away from the podium, he recognized a burning need to refine his strategy. He couldn't simply respond to the critic's jabs, he needed to anticipate them. Determined yet anxious, Jonah sat down at a small cafe nearby, an outpost amid the rush of the city that seemed oblivious to his turmoil. He pulled out his notebook, its pages filled with fragmented thoughts about leadership, personal growth, and how to transform vulnerability into strength. There were data points waiting to be synthesized into something powerful. Beneath a swirling tempest of ideas, Jonah began drafting a plan, forcing his hands to match the frantic pace of his mind. He needed a framework not just to respond to the critic but to harness every ounce of tension into a narrative that could not be easily dismissed or spat upon. What did it mean to lead while carrying the lessons of his past? He began piecing together the intricacies of a vision that included not just empathy but actionable change. While the critic's words echoed ominously, they also filled him with clarity. He had to illustrate that acknowledgement of struggles was the first step toward meaningful leadership. That was the story he wanted to tell, the one that couldn't be dismissed as merely anecdotal. Words began flowing with vigor, and he lost track of time skimming through various leadership principles. For hours, he immersed himself in studies of both celebrated and disgraced leaders, dissecting their decisions under the magnifying glass of empathy. With each note, he felt a growing sense of control over his narrative. But then, doubt crept back in, like an unwelcome intruder. What if he failed to translate those insights into practice? Jonah couldn't afford to falter now. He needed to meet this challenge head-on, turning doubt into discussion points, carefully laying out a path that others could follow. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the window, he closed his notebook with a heavy sigh. There was work to be done. He needed to refine his story into a manifesto for strength in vulnerability, something that resonated with people's hearts and minds, a cohesive vision that could hold against the critic's scrutiny. With renewed focus, Jonah knew he needed collaboration. He picked up his phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing a familiar number. Madison. They needed to strategize together. She saw the nuances he often overlooked, those qualities that could fan the flames of his vision into something formidable. But deep down, a nagging question remained: would it be enough? If he stood up to the critics, if he asserted his worth, what if the backlash was heavier than he could bear? His heart raced in anticipation of Madison's voice, and he wondered if he was truly ready for this next step or if he risked exposing the tender part of himself he sought to protect. Would he be strong enough to withstand the fallout? As the phone rang, Jonah's mind spiraled into uncertainty. Would Madison's insight help him create the strong narrative he sought, or would their conversation only highlight his weaknesses? When she finally answered, her voice was a soothing balm. "Jonah, what is going on?" she asked, sensing the urgency in his tone. "I need to talk strategy. I want to refine my message, make it solid, something critics can't easily tear apart," he replied, his words stumbling out in a rush. "Absolutely," she said with an encouraging warmth. "Let us meet up. I have some thoughts from your speech that might help anchor your ideas." Their usual meeting spot was a quiet park bench shaded by the trees, a fitting backdrop for discussions that always carried a weight of significance. As Jonah navigated the familiar route, his thoughts spiraled. Every moment replayed on loop, the critic's approving nod snuffing out his courage, the crowd he hoped to inspire, the specter of failure looming larger. When they met, Madison was already poised with notepad in hand, her focus sharp. "Let us break this down. What do you want your core message to be?" she asked, her eyes narrowing with intent. Jonah hesitated, then summoned the fire he had felt while drafting his notes earlier. I want to show that true leadership is born from struggle. That vulnerability isn't weakness but a wellspring of strength, he articulated, feeling the words sparking a flicker of hope within him. Great start, she nodded. But how do you plan to make it relatable? People need to resonate with your personal journey. Jonah felt his pulse quicken. I have to share my story, my struggles. My past isn't just baggage, it's a foundation. If I expose that, I can frame it as a relatable narrative of overcoming. But what if it backfires? The doubt surged again, clawing at him. Madison leaned closer, her voice low but firm. What if it doesn't? The risk is high, yes, but so is the potential reward. Authenticity resonates with people. You have to believe your story can inspire. Her words pierced through his clouds of doubt. He was armed with insights but needed to embrace the rawness of his experience. Jonah would need to share his truth, the failures, the moments of despair, and how he rose from them. It was a heavy prospect, revealing the shadows he had fought hard to leave behind. As they delved deeper into the strategy, Madison suggested a series of topics Jonah could explore in his next address, urging him to weave personal anecdotes into the larger narrative of leadership as transformative power. With each idea, Jonah felt a growing sense of purpose. But the fear of being unmasked nagged at him. Look, Jonah, it's perfectly okay to feel vulnerable. In fact, that will connect you with your audience, Madison said, as if reading his mind. But you need to prepare for backlash. Not everyone will love your honesty. True. But isn't that part of the journey? He paused, grappling with the realization that exposing oneself could draw both admiration and ridicule. Suddenly, a voice in the distance broke through his reverie, a loud argument between two passers-by. He turned to watch, momentarily distracted from the conversation. A visceral tug of feeling washed over him. The rawness of their conflict reminded Jonah of moments when he had been publicly corrected or belittled, yet had to stand firm in his truth. Are you ready to face the fall? Madison's question cut through the lingering noise, pulling him back. I don't know, Jonah admitted, feeling the weight of honesty in his words. And he truly didn't. He was standing at the precipice, balancing between vulnerability and backlash. Madison's gaze remained steady. Together, we can craft a narrative that showcases your resilience. But you will have to step into the discomfort. That's where growth happens. As the sun dipped below the treetops, Jonah felt the stirrings of determination. A realization surfaced: he could not hide behind the polished facade any longer. He had to confront the critic with his truth, with the heart of who he was. With renewed resolve, two thoughts clashed in his mind: what if he succeeded? Or worse, what if he failed? The moment had come to face the ghost of the critic and the shadows of his past, but Jonah had no clear path yet. Steeling himself, he met Madison's eyes with newfound determination. Okay, let us do this, he said, his heart pounding in exhilaration and fear. They began mapping out the speech, each word a beacon in his engulfing uncertainties, drawing him closer to confronting the very backlash he dreaded. As Jonah drafted, a realization washed over him: perhaps vulnerability wasn't just about showcasing his past. It needed to culminate into a bold assertion of who he was becoming. Then came a message on his phone, an article headline that made his stomach lurch: local leader S fall from grace, will his past resurface? What had he just opened himself up to? The weight of impending judgment loomed heavier than ever, pressing against him like a wave ready to crash. Jonah stared at the article on his phone, the words blurring as his breathing quickened. The headline felt like a judgment from above, a foreshadowing of the very fears he had just shared with Madison. His heart pounded, the implications were overwhelming, and suddenly, the weight of vulnerability seemed crushing. Was this the scrutiny he feared? The moment felt surreal, but deep down, the incident triggered a well of resolve. Jonah. Madison's voice brought him back to the moment. Concern etched her features as she leaned in closer. What did you find? He hesitated before showing her the glowing screen, processing the rise of anxiety pulling in his stomach. As her eyes scanned the article, Jonah's mind blitzed through thoughts laden with doubt. What if his past actually did resurface? What if the crowd found his story absurd, something to mock rather than connect with? Jonah, you can't let this define you, Madison urged, snapping him from his spiraling thoughts. You're defining your narrative. Your past has shaped you, but it doesn't limit you. A flicker of understanding ignited inside him. Her confidence in him provided a steady anchor amidst the chaos of external judgment. But what if my story isn't enough? What if they don't see the strength? Doubt curled tightly around his heart, squeezing. Madison placed her hand over his. That is why you need to make the narrative concrete. If you own your story, your struggles, they will resonate. It's not about being perfect, it's about being real. Those critics, they don't define your potential. Your voice does. Jonah nodded, the urgency of her words puncturing his apprehension. He was caught in a vortex of feelings, fear trying to overwhelm him, but a growing sense of agency glimmered through. As they resumed their brainstorming, each idea felt increasingly tethered to the core message he wanted to convey. Authenticity. Resilience. Rising from failure. Madison tapped her pen against her notepad. You mentioned a moment during your early career when you felt utterly defeated. Tell me more about that. Jonah leaned back against the bench. Memories flooded in, the crushing disappointment of a failed project, the biting comments of colleagues, the gnawing sense of inadequacy. I thought everything I worked for was ruined, he said quietly. The embarrassment was palpable. I felt invisible. Then what happened? Madison probed gently. I had to choose. Either I let that defining moment pull me down, or I figured out how to bounce back. So, I worked late nights, rebuilt my connections, learned from those mistakes. I found a strength in struggle. The words flowed, almost like an unburdening. Exactly, she smiled, capturing his sentiment with enthusiasm. That transformation is your narrative. It's proof that resilience breeds strength. That is the moment you can showcase. Each piece of his story formed a jigsaw puzzle he hadn't realized needed unlocking. Jonah could frame his vulnerability as a precursor to his present drive, not a hindrance. The fear of backlash still loomed, but it felt less significant in the context of personal empowerment now shaping the conversation. Do you think I'm ready? He asked, unexpected uncertainty creeping back in. Ready? You've always been ready, Madison replied, the confidence in her voice unwavering. You just needed to acknowledge it. Once you face the backlash with transparency, your voice will gain strength, and your authenticity will shine through louder than any critic. Jonah released a deep breath. Madison's words bore truth, he could craft his story into a beacon. The looming article felt less threatening and more like a challenge, now an opportunity to rise above preconceived notions. All right then, let us refine this message for the speech. As they continued refining Jonah's narrative, each point turned into a building block, intensifying his resolve. The fear of judgment began combating with the exhilaration of exposing the true fullness of his journey. He was no longer simply a man defined by his past, he was a man shaped by his growth. Just as the last rays of sunlight crept behind the horizon, Jonah's phone buzzed again. Another notification. A twinge of anxiety shot through him. This time, he didn't check, he pushed forward. Are you okay? Madison's concern broke through his preoccupation. Jonah took a moment, considering the path ahead. Yeah. I'm better than okay. But underneath was the unchanged reality his past still hovered, encroaching like shadows in his mind, waiting to be confronted. As he closed his eyes, imagining the audience awaiting his words, courage wrestled with doubt. The fight wasn't over, it had only just begun. The moment to face the critics was approaching. Would he rise empowered by his truth, or would the shadows threaten to pull him back? Jonah woke up feeling the dawn of a new beginning, an echo of clarity reverberating through him. The speech he had meticulously crafted was now intertwined with the resilience of his past and the hope for his future. Today was the day he would defend that narrative, stepping into the arena where echoes of doubt once loomed threateningly. As he stood in front of the mirror, fixing the collar of the shirt that had become a surrogate armor, he confronted himself. Gone was the man defined by failure, the man who had wandered the streets in shadows. In his place stood a determined visionary ready to articulate the lessons hidden in adversity. He understood that vulnerability was a bridge to authenticity, a powerful starting point on his path to regaining authority. The venue was alive, bright lights shimmering, attendees mingling, laughter floating through the air. Yet, amid it all, a familiar weight settled on Jonah's shoulders. The critic, whose voice haunted his reflections, sat among the audience. For a fleeting moment, doubts surged forth, whispering questions of inadequacy. What would he say that could withstand judgment? With steady breaths, Jonah closed his eyes for a moment, summoning memories of the journey, his struggles, his evolution, the moments that shaped him. It crystallized the idea that his humanity, flaws and all, formed the backbone of his message. He wasn't merely sharing an anecdote, he was delivering a manifesto on resilience. As his name echoed through the room, he walked toward the podium with determined strides, each footstep marking a decisive break from the hesitation that once burdened him. The jitters were palpable but ignited a fire within, propelling him forward to stand not as a man seeking approval, but as one willing to foster change. Good evening. Thank you for that introduction. Today, I stand here not merely as a voice of authority, but as a testament to resilience born from struggle. Jonah began, embracing the swell of emotions that coursed through him. With each word delivered, he painted vivid pictures of his past failures, the warmth of human connection amidst isolation, and the metamorphosis ignited by tenacity. He wove stories that echoed vulnerability and transformation, how he grew from desolation into a reservoir of wisdom. So often we equate success with a polished image, with accolades and applause. But I've learned that true leadership emerges not from triumphs, but our ability to rise from setbacks. It's the willingness to sit with pain and seek hope in those shadows. His voice cracked momentarily, but he solidified his stance, anchoring himself in the authenticity of his journey. Creating a palpable atmosphere, he glanced at the crowd, intent on each face recognizing their fears, their own aspirations for transformation. Each nod, every flicker of recognition, affirmed his insights were resonating. This wasn't one-sided, they were in this together, bridging emotional divides. Jonah concluded with fervor, I challenge each of you to leverage your pain into purpose. Stand firm against the tide of skepticism. Your journeys, no matter how isolated they may feel, ripple out to inspire others. Let us embody the change we long to see. The applause erupted like a summer storm, urgent, passionate, a wave of collective approval that momentarily swept him off his feet. Jonah's heart soared, the burdens of judgment lifting as he realized the very people who once represented the weight of failure now acknowledged him with respect. But it wasn't the applause that truly marked his victory, it was the evolving murmur within himself. As he stepped off the podium, the sun began to set on a new chapter of his life. Every whisper of doubt from before was drowned out, replaced with a solid confidence and newfound competence solidified by authentic connection. Recognizing his worth and ability to influence change, Jonah no longer viewed his journey as a series of failures but as essential building blocks illuminating leadership on a broader spectrum. The critic's presence still lingered, but Jonah felt. The shadows recede, no longer mere fragments of fear but testaments to the importance of vulnerability and authenticity. As he exited the venue, a feeling of fulfillment enveloped him, he realized he was not just a survivor of his past but an architect of his future. Encouraged by the applause that rang in his ears and the acknowledgement that had become his source of strength, Jonah embraced the new identity that awaited him. Grounded in competence and fortified with resolve, he stepped into a life brimming with potential, a life no longer defined by shadows but illuminated by the light of his truth. To the audience who followed his journey, he issued an urgent call for self-discovery. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.